truth is the most convincing story that maps onto reality, and that's why the central narrative is falling apart.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
We must see the central narrative for the fiction that it is. We are Americans.
While elections are sometimes messy, this was a secure election.
The founders began the fight for human liberty and self-governance, and it's up to us to finish the job.
I'll tell you what, we are in a truth emergency right now.
This is the end game.
It's Thursday, August 1st, 2024, the 1289th day of dystopia. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. A warm welcome and hello to all of you listening to the podcast through a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can become a paid subscriber for as little as $50 a year or $5 a month. And when you do, you will get the ad-free experience. You'll be able to participate in the conversation over on Substack, and you'll be invited every Wednesday afternoon to the interactive live stream. And if you can't or you simply don't want to, continue listening to the podcast for free on a wide variety of podcast platforms. And of course, Rumble, all I ask is that you share it with your friends. You can find the links to the podcast, the writing, the social media, and the merch site by visiting linktree.com/I'm your moderator. Anyone who understands the roller coaster we've been on these past few years knows we haven't reached the end yet, and there may still be hard times to come. And as we add $1 trillion to the national debt every 100 days, we could be headed for some shaky financial times. If you're like me, you're figuring out how to diversify and make sure some seeds are planted for whatever may come. And that's one of the many reasons I think Bitcoin is part of our future. But it's not only about money. Bitcoin looks to be a critical part of the next generation of technology, communications, energy, verification, and even national defense. I'd encourage everyone to do their research and do it now. And if you're convinced of the likelihood that Bitcoin is an essential part of our future, then you'll need an on-ramp. I recommend River. River empowers you to grow your portfolio without any unwanted surprises and eliminates third-party custodians, putting you in control of your assets. Open an account with no minimum purchase requirement. You can get your Bitcoin journey started with just $1. Visit partner.river.com/reasonable to create your River account today. That's partner.river.com/reasonable. Now, I know that many of you out there understand the need to diversify assets, or maybe you're looking to protect your retirement savings, but you're not quite there yet on Bitcoin, and you feel better about precious metals. I get that too. I think going in multiple directions is wise, and I do that myself. And when it comes to buying precious metals, you want to be working with a good company, and that's why I've partnered with Goldco. Goldco is a 6-time Inc. 5000 winner, 2022 Company of the Year, and they've helped people like you and me place over $2 billion in gold and silver. And I have gotten silver from Goldco. And right now they're offering my supporters up to $10,000 in bonus silver while supplies last. Don't pass this offer up. Go to reasonablegold.com now. This is your opportunity to protect you and your family from an out-of-control government before it's too late. So don't wait a second longer. Take action today. Click on the link in the podcast notes or go to reasonablegold.com now and get your free gold kit, your free IRA kit. You'll be glad you did. And just a little note before we get started, I said this on the interactive live stream yesterday. I will be traveling tomorrow, so there will be no Friday show this week for August 2nd. I will be back on Monday. Also, before we get into what I want to talk about today, I wanted to give just a little update from Tuesday's episode, Maduro El Burro. Well, over the past couple of days, people just keep asking for Maduro to release the numbers, including the people in the fake administration in these here United States. They are unable to get the information, so they're not able to make an assessment about Maduro's claims of victory. We talked about how Elon Musk had been calling out Nicolas Maduro, and that's how we know that Maduro really did steal it. Elon is a good guy, and he tells us who the other good guys are. And he did that by first calling Maduro a donkey and then threatening him with his space lasers. And then he changed the color of Maduro's Twitter verification badge from silver to blue. And that's how you know the whole thing's serious. I mean, when you change the color of someone's Twitter verification badge, X, formerly Twitter, well, that's basically the last step before nuclear war. Well, the whole time, Maduro was calling Elon Musk a fascist and his archenemy. Elon responded to this, challenging Maduro to a fight, or maybe it was the other way around, and Maduro challenged Elon. But it was agreed that they would fight, and then Elon said, responding to a poll about who would win, that if he wins, Maduro has to resign as Venezuela's president, and if Maduro wins, Elon will give him a free ride to Mars. And as I mentioned on the live stream yesterday, Elon, if he loses, has promised to give up something that he could never possibly give up. And if he wins, he's asking for something he could never possibly ask for. So Elon has called the elections a fraud, said Maduro is a donkey, threatened him with space lasers, changed his verification badge, then offered and accepted to fight him and bet him either a free ride to Mars or resignation as quote unquote dictator. And just as an aside, with all of Elon's trolling about taking Maduro to Mars, he also suggested today that it would be a good idea to build a Noah's Ark on the moon. But don't worry, he's only trolling a world leader over election fraud. He would never be trolling about space. He really believes we're going to be able to do all these things, build a Noah's Ark on the moon and send people to Mars. It's like when he shot a Tesla into space and said you can tell it's real because it looks so fake. Elon would never joke around about outer space, but that's not what we're here to talk about. Elon said Maduro committed fraud, he's a donkey, threatened him with space lasers, then said if Maduro's able to beat him up, he'll send Maduro to Mars for free. Well, today he topped it off. Today he sent a message to Maduro on X, formerly Twitter, saying, "I'm coming for you, Maduro," with a little rocket emoji and then the bomb emoji. He said, "I will carry you to Gitmo on a donkey," with a donkey emoji. So Elon said Maduro committed election fraud. He threatened him with space lasers. He called him a donkey. He said he was going to take him to Mars. And then he said he was going to take Maduro to Gitmo on a donkey. Now, of course, absolutely all of those are ridiculous, except for the election fraud claim. Except for the election fraud claim. That's still real. Maduro is a brutal socialist dictator, or at least he is, according to brutal socialist dictators who happen to hate him because he's taking away one of their proxy states and moving away from their currency and thwarting their attempts to overthrow him. He's a very brutal dictator. You know, the same kind as Viktor Orban and Mohammed bin Salman and Little Rocket Man and Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping and Jair Bolsonaro. All of the leaders around the world that they hate are strongmen, they're dictators, they're autocrats. Always the same language. Always. Maria Corina Machado. Oh, she's the most popular freedom fighter Venezuela's ever seen. Maduro just has to step down and let her be the de facto leader, even though she didn't run in the election. Some old little known diplomat did. But for sure, she's the one representing the voice of the people. And that's why it's so good that all of those very based and red-pilled truther influencers cheered on the tearing down of statues and the rioting in streets. I mean, sure, they're indistinguishable from Venezuelan BLM, and we're being shown them by our mainstream media. But socialist, dictator, and autocrat is my trigger phrase. As soon as they say that, I just believe whatever they say next. Now, again, I think it's great that people are going to use this Maduro story to learn about the elements of election fraud in our own elections here in the United States. If Maduro's election process produced a fraudulent outcome that can't be backed up, and we have basically the same election process, in fact, certain parts of our election process started in Venezuela, well, maybe people might wake up to the fact that Joe Biden never actually received 81 million real lawful American votes, and the idea is preposterous. But nonetheless, people have largely forgotten about that for the last 3.5 years. They've been relatively silent about it, especially because they expected their lives to continue improving if only Trump and his supporters would all go away. So we've got this template of election fraud being laid down with this story in Venezuela. And I want to be clear, it's a good story template. I hope everybody learns the story and learns the principles of the story. But in the meantime, we don't have to abandon our principles just because we're triggered by what we see on television. Oh, Maduro's a socialist dictator who stole that election. We know what that's like. Let's promote exactly what we used to condemn. People with failed epistemologies are always on the lookout for quote unquote black hat psyops meant to make us look stupid. In the eyes of people who wore 2 masks, they think that there are certain subjects where if we question the obvious scientific truth of these subjects, then we're going to lose our reputations and we won't be taken seriously anymore. And those people who are really trying to wake up, those normies out there, well, they're never going to come in our direction. They're going to be put off by us questioning the dogma about everything. But that's not true. What's going to make you lose credibility is violating your principles every time you get confused about what's happening on television, or getting sucked into the immediate consensus opinion online, thinking that everybody must have really done the work. Again and again, this comes down to how one curates their information stream. If you're not filtering out people with bad epistemologies because you enjoy how they agree with you sometimes, and you believe that they're an important ally somehow of our movement, in quotes, you're going to end up vicariously responding to the same set of incentives and punishments as they are. And that usually means likes and attention online. We have a narrative template for being able to discuss the elements of election fraud, election rigging, stolen elections, and instead we're cheering for a globalist puppet candidate because Elon Musk said nice things about her and called her opponent a donkey. And it's funny because as that template is being laid down, we're getting some election stories and we're getting some new attention on election narratives here in this country. This is from today in the Federalist. Margot Cleveland, 2024 Georgia election poised to explode thanks to Secretary of State's inaction. The article details a complaint filed with the Georgia Secretary of State and the state election board that says tens of thousands of illegal votes were cast in the 2022 midterm. And of course, it's far more than tens of thousands, but they have very specific claims here. Naturally, in normie outlets like the Federalist, they're going to talk about how this might cause problems in the 2024 election and basically ignore the fact that Georgia's elections have been stolen for years, because then they'd have to focus on how illegitimate officials are in office right now making laws. And understanding that, people might then have to realize that they're not going to fix the problem by appealing to the people who benefit from the problem continuing. We also had this yesterday in Pennsylvania, and this is from Democracy Docket. They're not our friends. Pennsylvania court says images of absentee mail-in ballots are public records. A Pennsylvania appeals court today ruled that images of completed absentee and mail-in ballots are public records under state election law after a voter sought such records from the 2020 election. The Commonwealth Court of Pennsylvania says a lower court erred in holding that images of absentee and mail-in ballots were shielded from public disclosure under Section 308 of the Election Code, which says certain election materials are available to the public, quote, except the contents of ballot boxes and voting machines and records of assisted voters, end quote. They also ruled that the lower court failed to recognize that other provisions in the state's election code, quote, designate images of absentee and mail-in ballots as public records, end quote. They go on. Images of cast absentee and mail-in ballots cannot be considered the contents of voting machines, the court said. So a 2020 election case where evidence was withheld for this entire time based on a legal argument over a semantic technicality, with the people looking to block the release of this evidence arguing that ballot images were part of the quote-unquote contents of the election machine. And there are other examples popping up as well. But more importantly, the social incentive and punishment structure within the party of false decorum around discussion of stolen elections is changing. It's becoming something that everyone's allowed to talk about now. I've said for years that this moment is inevitable. We seem to be reaching it, and it's just a matter of how that moment will be handled and where the energy will be directed, because it's coming pretty quickly now. Elon Musk highlighted this post today on X, formerly Twitter, from this guy, Sean McGuire. McGuire is a partner at Sequoia Capital. He announced that he had had some revelation a month or so ago and was now supporting Trump. He gave a few $100,000 in a donation. Today, he said, the top two candidates got 155.5 million votes in 2020 versus 128.8 million in 2016. That's a 20% increase in percentage of votes during a period where the population grew by about 2%. Where did all of these extra votes come from? People that were excited to vote for Biden compared to Hillary? And Elon responded very strange. So we have a very powerful, very wealthy person, a person who's on one of the higher rungs in the elite hierarchy, in that party of false decorum hierarchy, who is supposedly very smart and very attentive to the world around him. And he is now making in public a claim that I have been screaming into the void for 3.5 years now. And I'm sure many of you have as well. This is the sort of claim that got me censored on social media platforms, and that may have happened to you as well. And here we are with 96 days to go before we are scheduled to have some sort of election. And we have one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in the world pretending to have just found out this thing that the other wealthy and powerful guy may have really just found out. What does it mean that this is finally achieving some sort of critical mass understanding? Or maybe more accurately, people have just been given permission to discuss something that should be immediately obvious to everyone who thinks about it. There is absolutely no way in the world that the total election turnout could increase by a full 20% in the middle of the very deadliest pandemic of all time. Now, Sequoia Capital, they fund all sorts of regime projects. It should matter that they are attached to reality and that they operate on a basis of truth. And the people who work there in a decision-making capacity are not lying to themselves and everyone else, because we're led to believe that they have skin in the game. They're making important decisions. I mean, these are the people helping to construct the world around us in that false reality layer and on Reality Prime. And so we have to ask a question that we have asked so many times before. Is this guy clueless, or was he lying up until now? Because he's acting like he just found out. Was he just scared to say it before now? If so, why was he scared? Probably the incentive and punishment structure in the party of false decorum. He's worried about his reputation. He's worried about his business. He's worried about offending the other wannabe elites in his circles, in his business. It's possible that he was willfully ignorant. It's possible that he's lying. It's possible that he's scared. In any case, he was avoiding an obvious fact about the world that was smacking him in the face because he thought he would gain personal advantage from doing so. Now, either he really has had a revelation, or he's just responding to incentives and repositioning in an attempt to pursue the exact same agenda for the world and the exact same strategies for his business and for his social life, but now under a different branding. Which one is it? Either way, how are these people our elites? How are these people our leaders? How are these people being allowed to shape everyone else's future? Even if these people are just responding to financial incentives, they're doing so while allowing society to collapse in the meantime, which will make all of those financial incentives ultimately irrelevant, unless that is They want to move to some compound on a foreign beach or a mountain somewhere and allow the world to burn. And again, I'm very happy that this conversation is now going viral. Elon Musk has one of the biggest platforms and the most influential voices in the world. But none of this is new. The argument is not more compelling than it used to be. People will say it's easier to recognize now that Joe Biden's reputation has been chipped away. Joe Biden's been exposed as maybe a little too old and too demented. The whole thing looks like a clown show now. Well, it looked like a clown show the whole time. People are only responding to incentives and punishments. They're responding to the permission structure. But Joe Biden's incompetence and incapacitation were widely available and on display in 2020. That's not new either. And fine, maybe it's an info op and it had to be that way, all good. But what we're being told is we had to lie to you for the good of everyone. And we shouldn't pretend that that argument sounds like the right idea when it's people we like making it. All right, so I want to address the neocon, GOP establishment, elite, Con Inc. media, Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley supporter reaction to Donald Trump's appearance before the National Association of Black Journalists yesterday, because those people had an absolute meltdown. They had to seek out their fainting couch. They were having a tantrum, a conniption fit. They found themselves in a tizzy. Donald Trump has upset us about racism. And so before we talk about that directly, I just want to say this. Donald Trump is not my God. He's not my messiah. He's not my idol. He might be a hero. I think Donald Trump is probably heroic. And I want to be clear that I said he's a hero, not my hero. But I think that he is heroic. And here's the definition of heroic from Merriam-Webster. And it's always worth noting, of course, that Merriam-Webster is a function of the regime as well. They change our language in real time, but I don't think that they have distorted the definition of heroic too severely at this point. But hey, you never know. In recent years, they've changed the definition of racism and the definition of vaccine. But let's have a look at heroic anyway. Of or relating to courageous people or the mythological or legendary figures of antiquity. Of relating to resembling or suggesting heroes, especially of antiquity. Exhibiting or marked by courage and daring, supremely noble or self-sacrificing. We could also describe Donald Trump as being on a hero's journey, in the sense famously described by Joseph Campbell, that starts with a character in his normal world, unable in some sense to become fully realized because of some personal characteristic or past trauma or life experience he was unwilling to resolve. In fact, he refuses the call many times. Comfortable with where things are and not wanting to leave that comfort zone and go on the journey that will present the only possible chance of actually resolving that thing that's preventing him from moving forward. Finally, something happens in the experience and the character can no longer refuse the call, so they cross that threshold and begin that journey. And over the course of that journey, they learn and grow and they experience all sorts of trials and tribulations. And then about halfway through, there's a Pyrrhic victory, a false victory. You think you've made it and you find out that actually, no, I was pursuing the right thing in the wrong way. I was pursuing this thing in the way I always had pursued it. And I thought I was doing it harder than ever. And I thought it would work this time. And I believed I had this great victory in my grasp. But it turned out it was fleeting. And that's when the real test comes, because you know how to do the thing out in the world, but can you get past that thing you've never been able to get past before? And it's about blasting through that thing and then returning home a changed man with new skills or new understanding. One of those major blocks finally being removed. I mean, think about the character arc. Donald Trump, brash billionaire and playboy, very showy in his material wealth, knows how to make himself the center of attention. And over these last 9 years, we've seen Donald Trump put his reputation on the line and put his fortune on the line, ostensibly for the betterment of his country, which means other people besides himself. He has stood there as a lightning rod for all the evil in the world. consider what has gone in his direction. And even if it's all an act, the Trump derangement is real. The hatred projected by the Trump deranged is real. So Trump is not a god. He's not a messiah. He's not an idol. He's not a cult leader. He may be a hero. He is certainly heroic. And that doesn't make him my hero. It just means he is an heroic person, hopefully doing an heroic thing. And as I said, maybe it's all an act. Maybe he's playing a part. Maybe it's part of the old bad thing. Or maybe it's just true that by giving so much power to our politics, we are already making a mistake. But Donald Trump doesn't need to be any of those things. Donald Trump is a tool. And if we take him at his word, he understands that, and he wants us to use him as a tool to fix America. And I would argue he has more functions than that, but let's focus on just that one for now. Now, people over the years have called Donald Trump a wrecking ball or a bull in a china shop, insinuating that his only purpose was to destroy things and hopefully he would destroy all the bad things. And I guess you could call a wrecking ball a tool, but there's not much to do with it other than attach it to the bottom of some sort of crane or swing and then let it destroy things. But let's take an easy one and think about Donald Trump as a hammer, okay? A hammer is used to pound nails into boards, maybe some drywall. Maybe you're framing a house, maybe you're hanging a picture frame. But there are other uses for a hammer as well. If you're using a regular old claw hammer, you can also pull nails out in case you make a mistake. Or you can pry one board from another. You might also use that claw side if you're demolishing some drywall because it makes a good tool for pulling. You might be able to take apart a hinge or pry a door open. And if you don't have a lot of tools around, sometimes a hammer ends up getting used for things you'd never expect a hammer to be good for. Necessity being the mother of invention and all. And no, I'm not going to say the thing, if all you have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. And yes, I understand it is a wonderful idiom. But here's the thing. A hammer is a hammer. You can't ask it to change what kind of hammer it is. You can't ask it to change itself into a screwdriver. And while it might be able to bang a screw into the thing you want that screw driven into, it also might not do that. You might end up breaking everything. And if you want it to unscrew something, then you're going to make yourself a real nice mess. Turns out hammers don't make great screwdrivers. They also don't make great drills or great saws. They're not the right tool for that. And I want to be clear that I am not insulting Donald Trump by referring to him as a tool. I could refer to him as a weapon just the same. And again, I believe that Donald Trump would be more than happy with that description. Donald Trump presents himself as a tribune of the people and as a servant of the people. And if we are to take him at his word, that means he is here to serve the people, to be used by the people for their purposes to achieve their goal. And he actually said something along these lines yesterday.
But as we're fighting to bring back the American dream for you and your family, the radical left Democrat Party bosses have installed a puppet candidate to fight only for themselves. Kamala Harris got 0 votes. She's totally scripted, owned, and controlled by the donors and the power brokers who created her campaign and who rip off our government and make billions and billions of dollars. They want to call them up and they want to deal with her. And I didn't deal like that. I never dealt like that. I didn't need the money. I said, no, I don't want to do that. I told a lot of guys that I like and some guys that I don't like, but very rich people, I just can't do that. I can't do it. They want to do the telephone systems. They want to do lots of little things like that. We'd like to take over the telephone system of the United States. I'm sorry, I can't do that. But unlike her, I cannot be bought and I cannot be controlled. I have no interest in that. My only loyalty is to you, the people. And you know that.
Now, again, assuming Donald Trump is not trying to pull the wool over all our eyes and lead us gleefully to our doom, he just said that his only motivation is to serve the people. And he's doing that by sticking up for the people, defending their interests, promoting their interests, trying to reveal truth to them however he possibly can, and as I said, making himself a lightning rod for all the evil of the world, because I assume he believes that's the only way out. Now, it turns out that there's a lot of people out there who say that Donald Trump is our God and our Messiah, our idol, and our cult leader. And they spend most of their time ignoring Donald Trump's functionality and nitpicking the things he says and does, not understanding that he is the tool that we are meant to use to fix this situation, because Donald Trump does certain things better than anyone else can do them. Donald Trump reveals truth to people better than anything I have ever seen, and probably better than any human in the last, let's say, 2,000-ish years. And how does he do that? Well, he does it by being divisive. I've called Donald Trump the magnificent sifter before, and I've talked about that process of sifting. An event happens, you watch the reactions to that event, and from that you draw information that you can apply in the real world. Because Donald Trump is thought to be such a threat, everything that happens is viewed through the lens of whether or not it helps or hurts Donald Trump and his supporters by the people attempting to tell us what to think, and at the very minimum, setting the tone for the quote-unquote public conversation. And Donald Trump, through his actions and the situations that Donald Trump provokes into existence, force people often into binary choices. And the side in the constant struggle session makes sure that everyone is willing to declare themselves in opposition to Donald Trump at all times. This has played out over the last 9 years in people's families, in their friend circles, in their workplaces, and it plays out the same way in major industries and elite subcultures like Hollywood or Washington, D.C., or whatever billionaires club, or whatever intellectual or academic circles. People have to declare their allegiance to the ideology of the Trump deranged. And obviously there are some parts of our culture where that is more pervasive than others. Like you couldn't be a Trump fan if you were black or gay or in the tech community or in the Hollywood entertainment industry. And depending on how outspoken people are naturally, or some calculation about what they think they have to lose and how it's more important than what other people have to lose, they will silence themselves to whatever degree based on the incentive and punishment structure within the party of false decorum dynamic they're responding to. Now, the thing is, people in those circles, unless they're these little bastions of absolute communist insanity, they won't generally hate you just for being Republican. In fact, some of them think it's kind of cool because for them, being friends with a Republican and understanding some of those ideas, they think adds something to their sophistication. It's like having a black friend. They think it makes them a little edgy. They have some sophisticated knowledge about the things the other children don't know. It's the same way they use their gay friend or their trans friend. It gives them special access to this firsthand knowledge from what the other half deals with. And it gives them a reason to punish and condemn anyone else who they can plausibly paint as having insulted their token friend. So they don't have a problem with Republicans. They don't have a problem with conservatives. That's just an illusion stoked by the controlled opposition on television. The Ben Shapiros and Dave Rubins of the world acting like they're the targets and they're the victims, while they get paid an extraordinary amount to be wrong about basically everything all the time, to the point where it seems like it must be intentional. They paint themselves as the targets of censorship when Google-owned YouTube legitimately just feeds people their videos nonstop, while, of course, other people remain censored. These sorts of so-called conservatives are not censored. They are not marginalized. They are not attacked. They are made into superstars by the mainstream media outlets. Dave Rubin and Ben Shapiro, as I mentioned yesterday in the live stream, were both included by Barry Weiss in the New York Times feature on the so-called intellectual dark web, where they were all portrayed as a new sort of intellectual renegade. They were advertised to the consumers of mainstream media as an alternative to the mainstream media, basically saying, are we too overtly communist for you? maybe you would prefer another brand of what we say that will be mildly anti-communist in the things it says, but just as communist in the way it ultimately views the world. We were told by the mainstream media who the intellectual renegades were, and they were painted as these arch-conservative enemies of everything good and holy. I mean, they had to be a little dangerous, right? Well, among the intellectual dark web was Eric Weinstein, who is the managing director of Peter Thiel's Thiel Capital. And his brother Brett Weinstein, of course, was in that group as well. And it turns out that basically everyone in the intellectual dark web is part of the new alternative mainstream media online. I've talked about that up many times. These are the people revealing the truth, but not right away, years later, and they're Trump friendly, but not pro-Trump. Some of them liked Ron DeSantis, and some of them just love RFK Jr. But all of them are coordinated just like they were before, and just like before they all go on each other's podcasts. Now again, maybe that's just all the best quote-unquote white hat info op in the history of the world, and Peter Thiel is running it in order to help Trump and the people around him wake the world up to what's really going on. And they understand that that couldn't happen as fast as we would have liked it to. So they've slowed down the process, and one day they'll take their foot off the brake. They will stop crimping the hose, and they will just let it all flow. And I hope that's what it is. I hope they're all very good guys who just so happen to be making an extraordinary amount of money for lying to millions of people at a time. And they are willing to sacrifice and take whatever reputational damage they incur as a result of having lied to so many people for so long. And wonderful, all good. The point is that they are linked to a tech oligarch who may be a good guy and may not be, and they've been promoted by the New York Times and mainstream culture and Google-owned YouTube, and now they all pretend to be part of some new independent media, even though they were all in mainstream media before and still serve that function now. Bari Weiss, by the way, as I mentioned yesterday, has her outlet, The Free Press, which is basically just the controlled opposition of this very info op. Once again, they're controlling both sides of the new alternative mainstream media, and they're doing it so that they can both attest to the truth of the underlying reality as presented. Most of the people in that info op on the so-called right side of it will freely tell you all of the problems they have with Donald Trump, all of the things they think he got wrong, all of the things they think he's lying about, all of the mistakes he's making all of the time. And they will tell you that their constant critique of Donald Trump, his agenda, and his so-called behavior is what makes them objective and us cultists. Because we won't complain constantly about Donald Trump's behavior on the same basis the quote-unquote left uses to complain about Donald Trump and his agenda and his behavior. And why is that? Well, that's because complaining about Donald Trump and expressing your agreement with the party of false decorum about Donald Trump is what allows you to remain in the party. That's one of the main things that keeps you from being exiled from the party of false decorum. Donald Trump is not only the lightning rod for all the hatred of the quote-unquote left, he serves the same function for their controlled opposition on the right. Constantly attacking Donald Trump is what allows their controlled opposition to be okay with them. It's what makes them say, oh, Ben Shapiro, he's one of the good ones. Oh, Dave Rubin, the gay dad, he's one of the good ones too. And so let's think about what that means. What does it mean that people who say they're on the right agree with the people they call the left, who they paint as their enemies, when they choose to agree with almost everything their so-called enemies say about Donald Trump, about the most powerful weapon, the most specific possible tool we could use to defeat the people they claim to want to defeat, and they refuse to use that tool. They seem to be happy that other people are willing to use it, but they can't risk that themselves. I mean, they have too much to lose. Naturally, they are more important, and as more important people, they understand that to be important and to stay important, They need to stay in the party of false decorum, and in order to do that, you must be responsive to the incentive and punishment structure. And so rather than use the tool to defeat their ostensible enemies, what they do instead is figure out why the tool's not good enough and suggest the tool change into something else before they're willing to use it. And what do they want that tool to do? Well, they want that tool to communicate in a way that appeases the enemy, that makes the enemy less uncomfortable, because they don't want to deal with the enemy when the enemy is acting all uncomfortable, because when the enemy gets too uncomfortable, that's when the struggle sessions happen, and they're sick of having to defend Donald Trump, because they know if they keep doing it for too long, they're eventually going to be exiled. And people haven't yet realized that that's where the actual freedom is. After you break out of that paradigm, that's where the freedom is. Constantly catering to the child brains so that they don't have fits and tantrums is how the country got like this in the first place. If they're the enemy, what is the constant urge to appease them? And of course, we're told that we have to be able to convince these people. And if Donald Trump keeps upsetting them, well, we're never going to be able to convince them and bring them over to our side. Well, what side are we talking about? And how exactly are we supposed to appease them? Donald Trump has to change his communication style so that they will be less uncomfortable in the middle of an information war. Donald Trump is a leader, but most importantly, he's a tool and a weapon in an information war. His communication is the use of that weapon. And our ability to take advantage of that is how we use the tool. If he is going to be a servant of the people and a tribune of the people, then we need to properly understand how to use that tool and how to use that weapon in order to win the information war. And I am absolutely 100% certain that we don't do that by catering to all of the enemy's demands about how information is used. Well, I'll be damned. Who would have ever thought it worked that way? In the middle of an information war, we can't just amend our communications and our use of information to whatever the enemy chooses? Huh? What kind of upside down and backwards world is this?
This country is so screwed up. Everything's backwards.
Oh, yeah, it's that kind. He said that last night, too. Sounds like he's talking about a total inversion within the false reality. Everything's backwards. And right now, we have people who are telling us that they are the most diehard conservatives in the country. They want nothing more than to save America, restore America to its former greatness, while defeating wokeness and CRT and DEI. And finally, 4 years later, they're beginning to call it communism. Oh, it's so cute. Those are the same people telling us that Donald Trump needs to stop making their liberal friends so uncomfortable. They are sick of hearing all of the child brains whining about Donald Trump, and they're agreeing with the child brains and asking Donald Trump to stop. And that's funny. The child brains are also asking Donald Trump to stop on the same subjects. And let's take a moment to be clear about what caused all of these very conservative, uniparty right, anti-woke crusaders to seek out their safe spaces so that they could clutch their pearls with the rest of the children.
Some of your own supporters, including Republicans on Capitol Hill, have labeled Vice President Kamala Harris, who is the first Black and Asian American woman to serve as vice president and be on a major party ticket, as a DEI hire. Is that acceptable language to you? And will you tell those Republicans and those supporters to stop it?
How do you define DEI? Go ahead. How do you define
diversity, equity, inclusion?
Okay, yeah, go ahead. Is that what your definition?
That is
give me a definition then. Would you give me a definition
DEI.
of that? Give me a definition of
Sir,
that.
I'm asking you a question,
No,
a
you
very
have to
direct
define
question.
it. Define it for me if you would.
I just defined it, sir. Do you believe that Vice President Kamala Harris is only on the ticket because she is a Black woman?
Well, I can say no. I think it's maybe a little bit different. So I've known her a long time indirectly, not directly very much. And she was always of Indian heritage, and she was only promoting Indian heritage. I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black. So I don't know, is she Indian or is she black?
She has always
But you know
identified
what?
as a black woman.
I
She went to a
respect
historically
either
black
one.
college.
I respect either one, but she obviously doesn't, because she was Indian all the way, and then all of a sudden she made a turn and she became a black person.
Just to be clear, sir, do
And
you
I
believe
think,
that
I think
she is
somebody should look into that too when you ask continue in a very hostile, nasty tone.
Now, for some quick background there, this is the interview at the National Association of Black Journalists. There was naturally much complaining and controversy for even giving Donald Trump this platform in the first place. Someone had a tantrum and quit, and that was considered news. So Donald Trump got there, and then they made him wait for 35 minutes past when the event was supposed to begin. And all of that was from some audio technical problems that they were having. They didn't have the microphones ready, so the president couldn't go on stage yet. They were literally wasting the president's time. And it's entirely possible that they did that on purpose, although that's a conspiracy theory. Donald Trump, through his earpiece, had a difficult time hearing Harris Faulkner, the Fox News member of the 3 black woman panel set to interview him. That, too, seemed kind of intentional, but I get it. That's a conspiracy theory. Now, you could hear in the tone of that question that the ABC News reporter seemed not to like Donald Trump very much, and probably more importantly than that, she was looking to signal and posture as someone who really took it to that mean old orange man. And so her question to Trump was, do you think that Kamala Harris is a DEI hire? They are trying to get Donald Trump to answer a question, and whatever answer he gives, they're going to use that to make Kamala Harris look like a race victim. Nothing could be more obvious. Donald Trump said, please define what you're saying. And she said, diversity, equity, inclusion, as if Donald Trump asked her to tell him what those letters meant. I think it's very likely that Trump knew what those letters meant. He asked her to tell him what all those words mean in this context. What does it mean that she would be hired for diversity or equity or inclusion? Is that why she was hired? Well, the entire mainstream media actually reported that that was why she was hired. That was exactly why she was hired. We were told that Joe Biden was definitely going to pick a black woman as his running mate in 2020. And they had a whole slate of black women from which he could select. Karen Bass, who has now been awarded with being fake mayor of Los Angeles. Stacey Abrams, who runs the election fraud apparatus down in Georgia. Val Demings of Florida. Keisha Lance Bottoms, who was probably just named as a sort of PR effort. And Susan Rice were among the names discussed. And then they finally settled on the person who had already been chosen from the beginning, Kamala Harris. But the ABC reporter didn't want to get into the nitty-gritty details. She just wanted Trump to participate in the framing of her question. Everyone has seen this tactic before, and that reporter was hostile to him the whole time, and he called it out throughout the event. Now, most people have just seen or heard that particular clip. They didn't watch the whole thing. If they had watched the whole thing, they would understand that there was a mixed reaction to Trump's performance in that very hostile crowd. And over the course of the event, the reactions to Trump actually improved. There were a lot of people in that room that liked what Donald Trump was saying, and they appreciated his directness and the fact that he wasn't going to allow these race baiters to run over him. This is a lesson in not catering to the enemy, not catering to wokeness, not backing down to appease the child brains. And the people who claim to be anti-woke crusaders are just as triggered as the people they refer to as leftists. And so let's take just a second with the claim. Most people know that Kamala's father is a black Jamaican man. He's not African, and historically, her family on her father's side actually owned slaves. She's not the descendant of slaves. She's the descendant of slave owners. But you can't talk about that because that might make people reframe what their idea of slavery is. Kamala's father is an academic and a communist. Kamala's mother is an Indian woman. Kamala Harris was raised for a nice chunk of her young life in Canada. Neither of her parents were American, and but for regime-manipulated court precedent, Kamala Harris shouldn't be allowed to serve as vice president or president. These are not things the mainstream media typically covers, and they certainly don't frame it in any of these ways. In fact, they avoid these conversations. Because if Kamala Harris and her status as a woman of color, but not a colored woman, a woman of color, if all that comes into question and she's no longer just seen as a black woman who can attract the black vote, well, that's going to kind of blow up a big narrative support column that the collectivists have been using in this country for centuries. It would make it blatantly obvious that they're just trying to take advantage of racial tensions and actually have no interest whatsoever in helping out oppressed minorities. So Trump said that he's known about Harris for a while. He has known her, but not directly. And he talked about how she always used to present herself as Indian. Here she is in 2019 with Indian comedic actress Mindy Kaling, a very devout communist.
Okay, so what we're going to cook today is
an
Indian recipe.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
you are Indian.
Yes.
Okay, and I don't know that everybody knows that, but I find that wherever I go and I see Indian people at the supermarket, on the street, everyone's like, you know, Kamala Harris is Indian, right? It's like the thing we're so excited about to have you running for president.
Yeah.
So we're both Indian,
Yes.
but actually we're both South Indian.
Yes. You look like the entire one half of my family.
Okay, thank you.
You do.
I've been telling people
You
we're
do.
related already,
Yeah.
so this is perfect. It's basically true. And so were you raised eating South Indian food?
South Indian food.
Now, that clip is a little difficult to watch. It is cringeworthy. Kamala Harris is visibly uncomfortable the entire time, but cackling right along anyway, as she pretty much always is. Kamala Harris is one of the most superficial and inauthentic people to ever appear on the public stage. Even many retarded people can easily reach the conclusion that there is absolutely nothing there. And there's another clip from that TV show floating around as well, where Kamala Harris and Mindy Kaling bond over the fact that they keep spices in empty Taster's Choice coffee containers. You know, like good down-home Indian people do. Trump, by the way, posted that first video clip on Truth Social and said, crazy Kamala is saying she's Indian, not black. This is a big deal. Stone cold phony. She uses everybody, including her racial identity. Here she is before becoming a senator.
You could become the first Indian senator in U.S. history, which would be quite an accomplishment.
Knock wood.
You could become the first Indian American senator. Knock wood, she responded, with the cackle, of course. Throughout the late afternoon and evening last night, all sorts of Kamala is Indian content flew around social media. So all sorts of people saw it. All sorts of liberal outlets thought they were going to get a big win calling Donald Trump racist again. They were going to show all black Americans that Donald Trump had finally taken off his Klan hood and become Donald Trump again. He said she used to be Indian and now she turned black. How could he? That is not a politically correct way to talk about race in this country, especially not if she's the first woman vice president and the first Asian American vice president. Wait a second. Black woman vice president. And of course, they have called her the first Asian American vice president. And it's weird, of course, that they always skip over the fact that she's illegitimate. She is a fake vice president, which means that the only time a woman, a black woman, an Indian woman, or an Asian American woman has been vice president, it's because they stole it. That'll be good for race relations long term. But let's hear from the first black lesbian woman press secretary.
If I can ask you about something that's happening at the NABJ right now, Donald Trump is speaking to some of the reporters who assembled there, and right out of the gates there was what can best be described as a contentious exchange where the former president said, I'm asking this through the lens of someone who represents the president, vice president, not someone who has to speak as a campaign question. He says of Kamala Harris, the vice president, she was always of Indian heritage and she was only promoting Indian heritage. I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, he said, and now she wants to be known as black. So I didn't know, is she Indian or is she black? Wow. She has always, this is unclear, I respect either one, but she obviously doesn't because she was Indian all the way, and then all of a sudden she made a turn and she went black. Your response to those comments?
He is a candidate, so I'm going to be super careful. Wait, no, hold on. I have more to say. I certainly have more to say. As a person of color, as a black woman who is in this position that is standing before you at this podium behind this lectern, what he just said, what you just read out to me, is repulsive, it's insulting, and, you know, no one has any right to tell someone who they are, how they identify. That is no one's right. It is someone's own decisions. I'll add this. Only she can speak to her experience. Only she can speak to what it's like. She's the only person that can do that. And I think it's insulting for anybody. It doesn't matter if it's a former leader, a former president. It is insulting. And we have to she is the Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris. We have to put some respect on her name, period.
Now, listening to that TV news character recite the quote was hilarious. Karine Jean-Pierre's response was obviously utterly vacuous. She spent a third of the response describing where she was standing. For me, standing in this room, behind this podium, behind this lectern, behind this microphone, getting ready to speak into this microphone as the first black, lesbian, woman, Democrat, curly-haired girl to ever be press secretary, I know that only Kamala Harris can define who Kamala Harris is. We need to let people identify the way they want to identify. If this woman, if this black woman, if this black Indian woman, if this individual wants to identify in whatever way this individual wants to identify, this individual should be able to identify that way. And I mean, especially this individual being talked about by a former leader, a former president. Well, they better put some respect on that name. Karine Jean-Pierre has to keep it real at the end. Kamala Harris at the Megan Thee Stallion concert the other day in Atlanta, Georgia, said that she has to go out and win in 2024. These people are embarrassing, but we have to cater to them, don't we, normies? We've got to convince them to come on over to our side, or else we might not win a fake election. We need the votes of the people we're never going to get to vote for us. Sure, they hate us, but as long as they control everything and continue to call us racist, well, we're just going to have to do whatever they say. And think about what this is. So-called conservative, uniparty right, anti-woke crusaders who've spent the last decade congratulating themselves for knowing who has the wee-wees and who has the hoo-has most of the time, have been making fun of people for telling everyone else that they can identify however they want. Well, that is what Karine Jean-Pierre just said that Kamala Harris is allowed to do. Donald Trump has to put some respect on that name. He can't argue with Kamala Harris's self-identification, apparently. And the people on the Uniparty right want to protect Kamala Harris's ability to identify however she wants because they're worried that their liberal friends, the people they call the enemy, are going to become uncomfortable and have a tantrum. And of course, that tantrum was already happening anyway. This is CNN's Karen Attiah. This is how she reacted on X, formerly Twitter. Just a series of angry tweets freaking out. First, oh my God, oh my God. Then she says, I'm stunned at how horrible this is. Then she says, NABJ, that's National Association of Black Journalists, all in caps here, where is the fact checking? There is no live fact checking on the screens in the room right now or coming from the moderators. She actually wanted the TV screens in the room to call Trump a liar real time while he was on stage. They wanted TV screens showing fact checks to the audience so they wouldn't be inclined to believe the things Donald Trump was saying. You have to be able to call Donald Trump a liar in real time so all the children in the audience know that they shouldn't believe him. But she keeps going. The crowd has actually been gasping and upset at Trump attacks on NABJ, Kamala Harris's racial identity, etc. And I don't recall Trump attacking the organization. He called the particular interviewers hostile, but that was honest, and everyone there could see that that was honest. She said Trump is saying he doesn't know much about the Sonia Massey case in response to a question about police and qualified immunity. So what is that, racist? Not to know about one of your little race hoaxes? She kept going. Trump has not answered directly a single question. I'm so angry right now, she says. NABJ, this was a colossal mistake. You never should have given the man a platform. That's what she's saying. The National Association of Black Journalists should not give the president a platform because she wants to be able to, and she wants other black journalists to be able to call Trump a racist without giving him a chance to respond directly. And she does that while complaining that he's not answering the questions directly. They act like Donald Trump is on trial and he can't just answer a question however he would like to answer it. His answer is the answer. Analyze the answer. If he avoids your question, say he avoids your question. But you don't just get to force him to say things or force him to accept the framing of a poorly framed question. These people are insane. The so-called fact-checking organization, tool of the globalists, you can look at its funding on Influence Watch or wherever else. The Pointer Group posted on X, formerly Twitter. In case it's helpful, PolitiFact is live fact-checking the event here, and they link. Karen Attia quote tweeted that and said, this does not help us here in the room who aren't seeing it on the screens, and Trump is not being checked directly. Exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. This is a charade. And then she finally says, can we stop talking about J.D. Vance? So Karine Jean-Pierre wants Kamala Harris's identity to be respected no matter what identity Kamala Harris chooses. And this woman, who is the global opinions editor at the Washington Post, has a meltdown because Donald Trump is saying things that Donald Trump is supposed to know he's not allowed to say. That's what they're mad at. That's what they're triggered by. Donald Trump is not allowed to say these things. Saying things like this is what gets you kicked out of the party of false decorum. Karen Attia is letting her fellow child brains know that now it's time to tell on Donald Trump. We're going to be tattletales. We're going to tell everybody that Donald Trump has victimized us. And then, boy, oh boy, he's going to get in trouble. And the meltdown ensued. The child brains had their tantrum. And as you might suspect, that made all of those so-called conservative, uniparty right, anti-woke crusaders melt down with them because they didn't want to deal with having to defend Donald Trump while their liberal friends were having another meltdown because Donald Trump made them too uncomfortable. Every time a meltdown like this happens, they know a struggle session from their liberal friends is soon to follow. Are you really going to vote for this man when he challenges people's racial identity? And of course, since they've spent the last 9 years saying things like, oh, yeah, I agree. He shouldn't be saying things like this. Yeah, it's pretty dumb for him to be saying things like this. They have to do that once again. But they can't just respond when asked. They have to be proactive. They have to signal their virtue to their liberal friends so that their liberal friends won't take it out on them. And I don't want to belabor this too much, but let's see a little bit of the reaction. This is from a woman named Brittany Martinez on X, formerly Twitter. Her bio on the platform says, proud American, Republican strategist, alum of lots of things. The first being Speaker McCarthy, that being Kevin McCarthy, and the second being Harvard's Kennedy School, which is like a breeding ground for globalists. She was still freaking out this morning. She wrote on X, formerly Twitter, wherever you lie on the political spectrum, I think many of us can agree that Trump isn't particularly known for his calm demeanor or subdued composure. But these last 24 hours have really exposed an unhinged candidate who's spiraling. Now, that's ridiculous, but we don't need to prove this person wrong. We can just understand it's ridiculous and focus on the important things like, who in the world is this person pretending to help? She's got a picture of Ronald Reagan in her Twitter bio. And apparently she used to be a staffer for Kevin McCarthy. And for whatever reason, she's supporting Kamala Harris. I mean, that is what she's doing. I used to talk throughout the entire Ron DeSantis debacle, that fake campaign, with all of his supporters, about how all of those people are actually just Biden supporters. They rolled over and took it in 2020. They shut up about election fraud. They watched their country be usurped, and then they said, no, it's fine. It's fine. We'll just get through it. And then they tried to remove the guy the election was stolen from. So they accepted that the country was usurped, and then they took the side of the usurpers and said, you know what? We should just move on from this. Those people are as committed as Biden supporters are in supporting Joe Biden. Joe Biden could have never been seen as a legitimate president by anyone if all of these Uniparty right conservatives hadn't simply rolled over and taken it and said, oh, we need to preserve these institutions. And now they're supporting Kamala Harris. They are defending Kamala Harris so that their own personal liberal friends will not put them through a struggle session. And fine, Harvard Kennedy School, she's a normie, she's a rhino, she's a globalist hack. Who knows how she came to work for Kevin McCarthy? But this person doesn't seem to have any problem with publicly identifying as a proud member of the Uniparty right. And all of those so-called conservatives were more than happy to be anti-Trump in past years. They're more than happy to be anti-Trump now. These are the sorts of people who went out and said nice things about Nikki Haley during the fake primary, because they'll say whatever they're told to say. They will say anything as long as their liberal friends keep giving them credit and increasing their reputation. But what about those edgier people, the people who are the real rock-ribbed conservatives, the people who really love to go out and trigger the leftists and, drink their liberal tears? Well, here's Tommy Lauren on X, formerly Twitter, yesterday. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but making Kamala a martyr for her race and gender is really going to backfire on the Trump campaign. It's such an unforced error. The strategy is only going to allow Kamala to escape her radical record and radical policies. I really don't understand why the GOP seems to enjoy pissing winnable elections down our legs. Now, first off, that's gross. Also, it's a very dumb metaphor. Peeing yourself suggests that you're scared. But Donald Trump's not scared. His supporters aren't scared. Tomi Lahren is scared, and she's acting scared. She's scared of her liberal friends who are going to put her through a struggle session, and she will say that she's actually only scared of losing an election, a fake election, an election she and everyone else knows to be fake. She is claiming that Donald Trump needs to be more careful in how he communicates in the middle of this information war in order not to make the enemy feel uncomfortable and have a tantrum, because that'll make it harder to win their fake votes in the fake election. She is advocating that people give up their principles and refuse to speak honestly in order to attempt to secure the votes of people who would never in a million years consider voting for Donald Trump. And what are they doing that about this time? Race and gender. The so-called conservative Uniparty right anti-woke crusaders got triggered by something Donald Trump said and are now having a meltdown over race and gender with their Uniparty Left counterparts, who they've spent years and years and years describing as the enemy. And think about how this looks to normal people. Donald Trump said, Kamala always said she was Indian. The woke Uniparty right and left both responded by saying, he can't say that. Donald Trump should not say those things. And of course, the people on the Uniparty right, they say that that reaction is because they really want to win this fake election. And Donald Trump is going to make it harder to win this fake election. They're all about winning. You see, that's why they're concerned trolling Donald Trump over the way he talks about race and gender. It's because they're so focused on winning. They're only tearing Donald Trump down all the time over 9 years, nitpicking absolutely everything that makes them feel uncomfortable because they're just focused on winning. They're agreeing with their ostensible enemy because they're just focused on winning. They are protecting the feelings of the people they call woke and communists now, finally, on the issues of race and gender because they're focused on winning. And everyone else is supposed to simply stand by and believe that. They are legitimately helping the enemy win an information war by not only refusing to use the only tool in the toolbox, the best tool you could ever possibly imagine, and not only that, they are demanding that the tool change into something else. And why is that? Well, it's because the tool's not the right one for the job from their perspective. Because the job's not the same from their perspective. The job from their perspective is that whoever the president is will help them improve and increase their personal brand, their status, their wealth, and their reputation. And of course, that's the job of the president. That's the job of absolutely everyone around them. They have a singular focus on their own advancement. That's why they're willing to say and do anything. Tomi Lahren is not supporting conservatives or conservative causes. She's supporting Kamala Harris. And we should stop lying about what this is. We should be calling these people Kamala Harris supporters. They are more devout and more committed Kamala Harris supporters than many of the people who will ultimately be counted as voters for Kamala Harris, many of whom aren't even alive. To the extent that they will cast votes in a fake election for Donald Trump at all, and who knows if they will, not that it matters, they will do so while making sure that everyone else knows their personal brand, their reputation should be entirely separate from Donald Trump. They just simply can't bring themselves to vote for someone like Kamala Harris. She doesn't reflect their values. Except, of course, she does reflect their values. And that's the problem. Their only value is personal advancement. That's why they shut up when the country was overthrown. They haven't really talked about election fraud this whole time. They haven't examined the system. They haven't come to the conclusion that our elections are wholly incapable of producing legitimate results, which means they're incapable of producing legitimate officials, which means our government is illegitimate. And they've ignored that now for years. They chose to avoid discussing the usurpation of this country in exchange for money, attention on social media, and some level of respect for the people they call enemies. They ignored the usurpation of the country so they could focus pretty much 24/7 on race and gender issues, letting everyone know that the only way to actually defeat these wokes, these brain-dead communist zombies, is to talk about whatever they want all the time and only in their terms. They think the way to defeat wokeness is by having group podcasts with Dave Rubin and Michael Malice and Christopher Rufo. And then they will cheer for months on end if Ron DeSantis pushes through some tiny irrelevant law or statute or regulation that says you can't have that book in our schools. That's how you defeat wokeness. You just talk about it all the time while ignoring all of the real issues that actually allow these people to take over the country. And the most important, or maybe the second most important, being the fact that we don't have real elections. So none of them can ever be held accountable for their behavior. If we had legitimate elections in this country, the wokeness would not matter. No one would stand for what the schools are teaching. No one would re-elect public officials who go in and pass the laws that allow this. But they ignored that. In fact, they cover up our rigged and stolen elections and go back to focusing on race and gender. You know who else does that? The people they call the enemy. They carry out the exact same strategy that the enemy carries out with the exact same target, Trump and MAGA. They direct the force of that hate movement at Trump and MAGA. And now, as I always say, the caveat I always give, maybe Ron DeSantis himself is kayfabe. It's very unlikely that the entire media operation around him is also just participating in kayfabe, making themselves the bad guy. But even if that is possible, there's absolutely no way in hell all the people out there supporting what they say and supporting Ron DeSantis in a fake primary campaign or Nikki Haley are all just acting it out and playing along. Those people are every bit as Trump deranged as their controlled opposition on the left. And the truth is, both groups are leftists. If the country is falling apart and everything depends on winning this fake election, why are the people who put themselves out there as the most powerful American warriors, despite having ignored the usurpation of the country, why are those people trying to tear down Donald Trump? What they do is indistinguishable from what the enemy does. And of course, that's because they're the controlled opposition. The Uniparty Left and the Uniparty Right are two sides of the very same coin. They don't want Trump to win. They don't want MAGA to win. They don't want to be replaced in the conservative power structure, and they don't want to lose their personal branding by going and joining the people and the ideology they actually represent. And they say they're doing all this to win elections. But then again, these people haven't won elections, and they haven't been right about anything. John McCain didn't win. Mitt Romney didn't win. Sure, they voted for George W. Bush twice. Some of the older ones might have even voted for George H.W. Bush. But all of them are now obviously just uniparty right clowns. They're all neoconservatives. Neoconservatism is the ideological descendant of Trotsky. That's militant Bolshevism. And of course it is. It's the exact same regime still in power now in a different part of the world, at a different part of the cycle, in a different location. But it's the same thing. They are ideological and bloodline descendants. Now, I'm not saying that to hold the votes against them. They didn't understand the stakes on what they were voting for at the time any more than I did. I didn't understand, and I was voting for the other side. But we can at least understand what the history actually means. These are two sides of the same coin. And we're being told, and Trump is being told, that everyone needs to appease these people. And they're saying we have to do it so that we can win. But they've always been wrong, and they've never won. They start wars. They don't win. They have pretend battles over legislation that they don't win. They brag about slowing down the communists a little bit as they become wealthier and more powerful and increase their reputation. And as they are wrong about everything, they were wrong about their hot takes on Trump and Kamala Harris too. An unforced error? Trump is unhinged? No. What Trump did was destroy the race narrative around Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris can no longer claim to be locking down the black vote. Trump just blew apart all Kamala Harris's claims to authenticity. Kamala Harris now seems like a used car salesman in the way she tries to relate to the quote unquote black community. She hired a female rapper to twerk and yell at the audience in Atlanta. It is a grotesque display of decadence and retardation. Is anyone now going to believe that Kamala Harris could beat Donald Trump in a real election because she secured the black vote, which, by the way, is supposedly the Democrats' base? They can't win elections without getting 95% of the black vote. And Kamala Harris isn't coming anywhere close. She can't even claim to in the narrative now because Donald Trump destroyed that by doing this. That is actually battling wokeness, not hosting panels with Chris Rufo and making trans content 24/7. But they said they did it to win. They basically did it on our behalf, and we need to do what they say because we don't know how to win. We're not the conservative elite. We need to know who our betters are, and we need to listen when they tell us what to do. Except, whoops, they were wrong again. Now, Thomas Chatterton Williams is a very serious intellectual and wannabe elite. He's a light-skinned black guy, born in New Jersey. He now lives in France. He got prominent by writing a book called Self-Portrait in Black and White, Unlearning Race. And he was one of those voices that was always on call throughout the summer of love in 2020. Thomas Chatterton Williams was going to bring some reasonableness and sensibility to the conversation. Well, he published an article in the wannabe elite globalist rag, The Atlantic, this morning. And the headline of that article is, Identity Politics Loses Its Power. Wait, what? I thought we were about to get the resurgence of identity politics. Trump, he made this unforced error. He tripped this wire, set off all the alarms. Now things are just blowing up everywhere. Oh, it's so unfortunate. We're never going to be able to win a rigged election this way. And I'm not going to go through this whole article, but let's hit some spots just so you can get the tone and tenor of this thing. Black Lives Matter's persuasive power and influence climaxed in 2020 in the reckoning that followed the murder of George Floyd. And by murder, I suppose he means died of a fentanyl overdose. It was a time of rare consensus when some 2/3 of Americans expressed support for the cause. According to the Pew Research Center, you see that? He's got data to back it up. It's got to be right. It's data. Pew, oh man, they're very respected. But by last year, only half of Americans continued to support BLM, and less than a quarter did so strongly. A majority of Americans say the increased focus on issues of race and racial inequality in the past 3 years hasn't led to changes that have improved the lives of black people, Pew found. Now BLM is weighing in on the candidacy of Vice President Kamala Harris. One might assume, based on the group's foundational emphasis on identity politics, that its support for a liberal black woman would be full-throated. Instead, I was surprised to see it release a statement last week that was strikingly critical of the Democrat Party's decision to elevate Harris without a primary. Democrat Party elites and billionaire donors are attempting to manipulate black voters by anointing Kamala Harris and an unknown vice president as the new Democrat ticket without a primary vote by the public, the statement reads. While the potential outcome of a Harris presidency may be historic, the process to achieve it must align with true democratic values. We have no idea where Kamala Harris stands on the issues. And that's true. Kamala Harris doesn't even have an agenda on her website. She has no policy proposals. There's nothing there. It is just a donation platform. The group called for a, quote, virtual snap primary, end quote, that would give voters a chance to voice their preferences and concerns. Bernie Sanders famously argued that, quote, it is not good enough for somebody to say, I'm a woman, vote for me, end quote. Now, Black Lives Matter seems to be arguing that it is no longer good enough to say, I am a black woman, vote for me. He then goes on to say that Kamala Harris would never depend on her identity to defeat Donald Trump. She's just focused on uniting the party. Then he says, there will be no snap primary. With 3 months until the election, the Democrat Party is saying that it's already too late. But Black Lives Matter's intervention will have been a deeply patriotic and beneficial one if it forces Democrat elites to take seriously the reality that the country is no longer interested in checking boxes and marking firsts only for the sake of it, and if it signals a correction to the excesses and miscalculations of the past few years. That, my friends, is a full admission of defeat from a very serious intellectual and wannabe elite leftist. Now, there may still be that snap primary. We might still see that elimination-style tournament that was theorized by none other than Rosa Brooks. But let's ignore that for now. He's saying quite clearly that identity politics no longer work, and if you can't even keep Black Lives Matter on your side, even though you fund them, you're really doing something wrong. He goes on to write a couple paragraphs later, but when BLM intended to signal a departure from the lockstep ideology of the past few years, or whether Rogers is right that it's been asking Americans to think beyond the narrow confines of race all along, and certainly they have not, the statement is a stark reminder of the limits of identity politics. And he gives a couple paragraphs of backstory about the progression of identity politics since the George Zimmerman Trayvon Martin incident. And we will skip down to the last 3 paragraphs. Harris, much like J.D. Vance, is particularly vulnerable to the liabilities of appealing to identity over substance. Trump has already tried to challenge Harris's racial authenticity, suggesting that she positioned herself as black only when it became politically expedient to do so. She was Indian all the way, and then all of a sudden she made a turn and she became a black person, he said on Wednesday, during a simultaneously ingratiating and contentious appearance in front of the National Association of Black Journalists. The best way to undermine this kind of cheap rhetorical gambit is to eschew arguments based on identity in the first place. It may turn out that Harris is precisely the leader this moment demands. This is how liberal and leftist this guy is. But that cannot be assumed. Installing Kamala Harris as the Democrat nominee and an unknown vice president without any public voting process would make the modern Democrat Party a party of hypocrites, BLM warned. It would undermine their credibility on issues related to democracy. Imagine our first black woman president not having won some sort of public nomination process. The pundits would immediately label it as affirmative action or a DEI move, and any progress made by a President Harris would be on shaky foundations. That's BLM saying that. Now, all of that is exactly true, and it's already baked into the cake. It's far too late to adjust from that viewpoint. And the sad part of that is that it actually reflects badly on all of the black Americans who have climbed the ladder of success through their own merit. These people who have been installed as diversity hires are forever going to carry that label. Collectivism does not work out in the end. This is how he concludes. BLM understands that Harris will not become president just because she is some avatar of generic intersectional identity, and that she would have been better off if given the chance to prove herself deserving of voters' support through a fair and transparent primary process. But of course, she couldn't have done that. She's tried to do that before, and no one anywhere liked her or thought she was prepared to do the job. Back to the article. Put bluntly, descendants of American slaves should not feel the need to search for our redemption or sense of representation through the symbolic ascendance of a child of Indian and Jamaican immigrants merely because she listens to Beyonce and has tan skin. The presumption that black politics is or ought to be formed in the epidermis has always been patronizingly false. The black voters defecting to Trump have recognized this, and the leaders of Black Lives Matter have now stated it plainly. Will the Democrat Party take note? And the answer is no, they won't take note. And neither will the conservative establishment, because they rely on this. Without gender and race, they are nothing. They are just supporters of the big uniparty machine. You know the uniparty machine, that thing that nearly every American at this point wants to destroy. These are the people keeping it alive. And we can talk about leftists till the end of days, but they couldn't survive without the uniparty right. They need the uniparty right. Joe Biden needed the uniparty right to attest to his legitimacy, and that's exactly what they did. Kamala Harris needs the uniparty right now to keep freaking out about the elections, pretending that they're real elections, pretending that Trump might somehow lose a real election because, as they also pretend, we're some kind of 50-50 country where they just keep talking about the polls as though the polls are real. But the polls aren't real. Every premise of their position is a failure. It is a falsehood. And once all of that is stripped away, you can see them for exactly who they are. They are standard issue villagers and child brains. They are the controlled opposition of the people they pretend to oppose. And all of them are stuck with tiny child-sized brains rattling around in their full-size adult heads like so many maracas. Nothing has changed. They don't want Trump to win. They don't want MAGA to win. They want Trump to lose so they can say he lost because he didn't listen to them. And the only way we're going to win is if we give them all of our power. It's the same thing they said in 2020 after they supported Joe Biden's win. It's the same thing they said in 2022, where they took the opportunity to blame the absence of a so-called red wave on Donald Trump, his candidates and his supporters, even though Donald Trump's endorsed candidates had like a 96% win-loss record. And think about that for a second. Everyone out there on both sides expects a red wave because they understand naturally the tone and tenor of the conversation. They understand the direction of the momentum, and everyone believes there's going to be a red wave. That is what people actually see and hear and sense in the real world. And then all of that is undone with the reporting of fake election results and then the contextualization by all of these never Trump or sometimes Trump so-called conservative, uniparty right, anti-woke crusaders who blame everything always on MAGA and tell Donald Trump and his supporters what they have to do in order to win, even though these people don't win anything and are never right about anything. And in fact, they're constantly promoting the agenda of the other side. But it's not the other side to them. It's the same side. They're the same people. Was Ben Shapiro crusading for truth on Russiagate, or was he just trying to call balls and strikes here, folks? I'm not never Trump. I'm sometimes Trump. I say that Trump does good things when he does good things, and I say he does bad things when he does bad things. That's called being objective, folks. Was he right about COVID? Was he right about masks? Was he right about lockdowns? Was he right about vaccines? No, he supported vaccines. Was he right about mail-in ballots? Was he right about the stolen election? No and no. Was he right about the very violent insurrection? Nope, he went along with the other side in that. Was he right about Ukraine? No. And then, of course, when the paragliding go-kart incident happened, he became one of the most malicious warmongers anyone could ever lay eyes on. Why is anyone taking seriously the idea that he or any of his pals should be telling Trump what to do? They are given one of the most powerful information weapons in the world in the middle of an information war. They are given an almost perfect tool if they understand what the tool is meant to be used for. But they don't understand the tool, and they're not actually trying to fix the problem. They're actually scared to use the tool, or maybe they just don't want to. And why is that? Well, it's because they're worried that that tool is actually used to divide people. And they're worried that they're going to wind up on the wrong side of that division. They're worried about that because they're already on the wrong side of that division, and they're just hoping no one notices. If they can just make Donald Trump go away, no one's going to notice that they're on the wrong side. No one will notice that they helped cover up a stolen election. They helped cover up the usurpation of the United States of America. And now they're trying to tell Donald Trump how he must communicate in the middle of an information war about race and gender so that people on the left don't get upset. Because if their liberal friends get upset, their liberal friends are going to put them through a struggle session. And then they might be exiled from the party of false decorum. And they might lose all that power and that status and that wealth that they've built up over the years, serving systems of power and lying to whoever they need to lie to, so long as their reputation, their status, their wealth keeps increasing. If Donald Trump should be taken at his word that he is a tribune and a servant of the people, and I believe he should be, then he is a tool that people must use. And the best use for that tool is showing us exactly where to cut. I have called him a magnificent sifter before because he separates things out. Donald Trump is the divider in chief, and that's exactly what's needed. Donald Trump forces people to think about the things that have been verboten. In the false reality, it's good to make everything about race, and no one is allowed to point out when people are making things about race for their own advantage. Where do you come down on that? Are you going to stand up for the values that you preach, that you profit from? Or are you going to give in to the struggle session and submit every time to the people you pretend to be fighting? These people continue to demand power based on their intellectual capacity, their expertise, their claims about knowing how to run the system properly, and most importantly, because of the true conservative values they represent. But where are their values now? They're defending Kamala Harris and their liberal friends on issues of race and gender, trying to get the president of the United States to submit to their struggle session in order to appease their liberal friends so they won't have another tantrum. They are trying to change how Donald Trump communicates in an information war that they say they're trying to win and that only they know how to win. And they're doing that by helping the enemy. Now, I don't want these people punished. I don't want them to have struggle sessions. I don't care what they believe, and I'm not trying to change their mind. I just think that we should be clear about what this is, because it's been 9 years now, and they're still pursuing the same strategies from the same mindset, making the same points on behalf of the same people. They ignored a stolen election and the usurpation of the country and have spent the last 4 years focused on race and gender. And they can pretend that Democrats and the left and the wokes, and now finally they're willing to admit the communists are their enemies, but they sure do spend a lot of time catering to them. I'll be back on Monday at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic, and Joe Biden will never be president.
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening to this episode for free, you can support me and support the show and the work I do by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can do so for as low as $50 a year or $5 a month. Comes out to under $0.25 per episode, and you'll blast right through the paywall for all of the writing. The merch store is www.cancelcouture.com, and you can find everything else by heading to Linktree, linktree.com/I'mYourModerator. And I'll see you soon out on the range. It's